a print is essentially an original artwork that's made through indirect means. So in order for something to be a print, there has to be an image transfer. It can be, however, as simple as a stamp, like a rubber stamp is a print, or as complex as something like the Mickalene Thomas print in Rodale Gallery, where there were 69 runs through the press. As I mentioned, prints usually exist in multiple impressions. However, there are also monoprints produced, such as all three of these large prints by Polly Applebaum. Those are unique. There's only one impression of those. This print, Love Park 9 by Polly Applebaum, is part of the museum's collection. We did have it on view a couple years ago, so I think you've probably seen it before. It was purchased in 2006 and is kind of a nice marker of how long of a relationship the museum has had with Durham Press. So Polly Applebaum came to Durham Press in 2002, and she told me quite honestly that she was really not sure about printmaking. She was very wary of getting involved with printmaking, and her process, her artistic practice is very much a solitary one, apart from the collaborative work that she does with Durham Press. But what she found when she went to the press was that they were very patient and very willing to find ways of working that made her comfortable and that allowed for her to have, again, this kind of fluid process of working in print. So she started off working with a number of different media. She worked with etching, she worked with screen print, kind of experimenting, and all with these floral forms. And these forms really became a progressively important part of her visual language, and they're in part inspired by Andy Warhol's flowers. So by the time that she came to the press, she had been cutting out and arranging hand-drawn flowers, and she would then photograph them to create her composition. And from there, she moved into creating installations where she'd have these hand-drawn flowers on these lushly dyed pieces of fabric, and she would intuitively place them to create installations that she called fallen paintings. And so these were the floral forms on the floor. And so Durham Press found a way to, starting with her hand-drawn flowers, they hand-carved these wood blocks, and you can see some examples of them here. Eventually, they made some 800 of these flower wood blocks. And so this kind of formed the vocabulary that she could select from. And the process of creating a print like this was that the staff would have a whole bunch of these blocks. They would be already inked in a variety of colors, and they would just be available. And so then the artist could come in, she'd have a sheet of paper, and these are the largest scale that she works at, but she works at a variety of scales. So she could have something like this, and you can actually see a picture in the catalog for the show that shows her working in this process. And she'd just start placing them on the paper. And she'd create her composition, and then they would run it through the hydraulic press to print it. And so this technique really lent itself to doing these one-off monoprints. So that's what these are. These are unique prints. She just laid these blocks out, they did one impression of it, and then they moved on and she did something else. And this is really kind of the ultimate scale scale in terms of like pushing the limits of both the paper and the press.
Hi everyone, thanks for tuning in. I'm Nicole, one of the educators at the Allentown Art Museum. You just saw a clip of one of our curators, Elaine, talking about Polly Applebaum and her work in our current show. I don't have all of Polly Applebaum's really complicated equipment or her big team of helpers to work with me, but I'm going to be demonstrating monoprinting at home. Monoprinting is one of the cheapest and easiest ways to do printing, and it's a lot of fun to try. So before you start monoprinting, you're going to need a few things to start. The first thing you're going to need is tinfoil. You also need a baking sheet, paintbrushes, and paint of some kind. You can use tempera, oil, or acrylic. You can even use watercolor. You need water to wash your brushes, paper, and you can even use a spray bottle if you would like. That's pretty optional though. So a few things to think about before you start monoprinting. In the video, we saw Polly Applebaum's wooden flower blocks. The tin foil will be just like the flower blocks. The idea is that you paint on the tin foil, and then you use the paper to make a print. I like to use acrylic paint. I just think that it comes out the best. And I'm going to paint a few quick things before I show you how to pull a print. So, something to remember about monoprinting is that monoprints are usually pretty abstract. They don't usually come out super photorealistic, but many artists do awesome things with monoprints. So you can try to do whatever you would like. I'm just going to do a few different abstract shape forms. Another thing to remember with monoprints is that anytime you print something, it flips it. So if you're doing something like letters or numbers, just be careful to flip your letters or numbers first so they don't come out backwards. So when you monoprint, make sure that you have a lot of paint on your brush and that you move pretty quickly because you don't want it to dry out too much. And the more paint you use, the better your monoprint will come out. And I think I'll just add a few dots of yellow here and there. So I just kept this monoprint super simple and easy. There's a few spots here and there where I can see my paint starting to dry out. So that's when my spray bottle comes in handy. I'm just going to mist it really quickly. I'm not covering it with a ton of water because then everything will spread out and it won't turn out the way I want it to be. Another thing, if you use oil paint, don't use the spray bottle because oil and water don't mix well. So I have my paper here. I'm just going to take it, press it down very carefully. Make sure not to move it around too much or your paint will smear. And then I'm just going to rub with my fingertips really simply, just like this. You can also use a rolling pin for this step if it's easier for you. So here I go. I'm just gonna peel up my monoprint. and there I am. There's my monoprint. Something really interesting about monoprints is that you can see all of the different little areas with your brush strokes. So I can see my brush strokes here, I can see them here, and it creates some really interesting textures and effects on your print. So thanks for joining us today.